The Adventures of Amina Al-Sirafi is a historical fantasy set in the Indian Ocean in the 12th century, featuring Amina, an older, I don't think it says exactly how old she is, but maybe like 40-ish year old retired pirate. At times it felt like kind of a weird mix of the Pirates of the Caribbean and Arabian Nights, which is not a bad mix. Chakraborty did a lot of research. As someone who has never been to the Indian Ocean in the 12th century, it did feel well researched. And then in the back, she references a lot of the works she looked into and how much research she did, and I think it really shows. She wanted it to be as historically accurate as possible, except for the plot, which has all the fantasy elements. To me, it did really give me that sense of faraway places and how those places felt. And really quick, before I get to the plot and other thoughts I have about it, can we just talk about this art? The cover art is so beautiful. This is done by Ivan Belikov, who also did the cover for The Priory of the Orange Tree. You can see the stylistic similarities, that big fantasy creature, the bright colors, love it. Cover design is by David Mann, and then what is a fantasy book without a beautiful fantasy map? Because it's historical fantasy, it's based in the real world, so it has the Arabian Sea and the lands around it, and then fantastical elements, which just elevate it and make it feel so magical. The map art is by Virginia Allen. I will link both of those artists in the description. So part of what gave me kind of the Pirates of the Caribbean vibes was how Amina is infamous in her part of the world. Like Jack Sparrow, people have heard of her and have heard of her exploits, and people are either fans and admire her or really hate her and would consider themselves her enemy based on maybe whether they are also a pirate or someone that she acquired goods from. At the point of this story, she's kind of a newly devout Muslim. She would have considered herself one her whole life, probably, but since retiring from the sea, she's really trying to fulfill her faith. That's a large part of her characterization. She tries to remember her daily prayers, and when she is in deep danger and her life is threatened, she calls on God, and she thinks of her daughter. She's been retired from the sea for a decade and has a 10-year-old daughter. Imagine being a pirate and then getting pregnant. She decided it would be best for her daughter and for her daughter's safety to leave the sea and to go live inland with her family. They live kind of alone in the jungle, close enough to the nearest town to get to when they need to, but far enough away for privacy and for safety. Amina is trying to guard her daughter from people who might try to come looking for her or who might mean her harm, or who would try to use her daughter to get to her. She's refusing to send her daughter to the local school out of fear and protectiveness. She's got to keep that baby safe. So they stay hidden away in their little jungle home. They're poor, which is a little surprising for an infamous pirate. You would think she had treasures stored away. But she is the kind of captain, or Nakuda, probably saying that wrong, that paid her sailors well, and retiring was unexpected. So she didn't exactly have a lot saved up at the time. And then along comes a lady who rides in on the shoulders of servants and offers a life-changing sum if Amina will come on this rescue mission for her. So Amina, having been a pirate, does get tempted by the offer of money, treasure. But she's not just a pirate anymore. Now she is a mom, and she has prioritized being a mom, prioritized her daughter for the last 10 years. So at first, of course not, she can't go sailing off like she used to and leave her daughter behind. But on the other hand, as she thinks about it, and as she thinks about her daughter, she could provide for not only her daughter, but for future generations with this one job. She could leave for a few months, maybe it will be dangerous, but her daughter will never have to go risk her safety to earn a living, or more than a living. Her daughter and her daughter's children will never have to work, will never have to go hungry. They will always be housed and clothed and fed, and that means a lot to her. And the sea calls to her. She is still a pirate at heart. Since leaving her ship and her crew and the sea, she has had to really bury that part of herself deep and to kind of forget about it. But having someone come along and say, one last time, and I'll pay you really well, is too tempting for her to turn down. The life of a sailor does mean you leave your family behind for long stretches at a time, and then you go home, bring back what you earned. Amina had never had to do that. She had never had to leave her child behind before. This is really hard for her, and she's really torn about what's actually better for her daughter, staying there and protecting her, or money for the rest of her life. And there are some good themes here about motherhood. There's a scene where Amina has a really good conversation with another woman about how their lives have changed after becoming mothers and what still matters to them. And that feeling of and the feelings of guilt for still trying to be the woman she always was with children. And kind of a theme of rediscovering who you are as a woman after having a child while on the high seas. But being a fantasy story, this is not a simple rescue mission. There is magic, magical creatures, enemies to face, old lovers, and Amina can't sail alone. She's going to need a crew. So part of that crew is looking up some old friends that she used to sail with who can go on this one last mission with her, and people whose expertise she trusts and who she just trusts in general, people she wants to sail with. And then there was an element introduced of this crew never having sailed with her and having to respect her leadership as a woman that I thought just kind of, it got introduced. She had to prove that she was worth following, and then it just kind of got forgotten for the rest of the book. It would have been nice to have some of those elements woven in a little more. It could have been developed better, I think. This book is pretty feminist overall. In some places, almost too much. Like almost veering into man-hating. I say almost because not quite there. I think what the author was going for was more just showing the female struggle and how some of the things that women deal with were the same in the 12th century and are still the same today. I don't think this is a book written just for a female audience. I think a man reading this could enjoy it just fine too, but I did get a sense that the author was trying to speak to what women go through, which as a woman and as a mom, I appreciated. And then as they set off on their adventure, pacing wise, around the midpoint of the book, it felt like they were coming to the conclusion. As far as the place they were arriving at, the people they were meeting up with, I was like, okay, this feels like they're getting to the end, but it's only the middle, so I didn't know where it was gonna go or what was going to happen. And that was kind of the point where some of the more fantastical and magical elements got introduced. We've seen some of the magic from the beginning, but it was kind of like magic exists, but they hadn't really had to deal with it yet. And as the story goes on, the magic they have to deal with gets more and bigger and harder to deal with. And so those magical elements are kind of what carry the story for the second half. And in some ways, it felt like this first book, because this is going to be the first of, I think, a trilogy. There's at least a couple more books coming after. It almost felt like this first one was an origin story for the ones that will come after it. Which is interesting because Amina is not young in this one. She's at least in her 40s, and she's already infamous. The Indian Ocean already knows about Amina Al-Sirafi. She already has a name for herself. But on this adventure, in this story, there's more. And in some ways, instead of being that one last adventure, it also feels like a new beginning. One of the things that I felt was a little weird was how modern some of the language sounded. In her research, Chakraborty did really try to have period-accurate terminology, turns of phrases. I think she wanted us to feel like we were there in that time period, but some of the language choices felt very modern. Like, this is how someone would talk nowadays. It wasn't terrible. She was a sailor, so super casual speech. If you were to think of it as the story taking place in its native language, Arabic, and then translating it to modern English, that makes it feel more like how this would read. Speaking of language, sailors, if you've ever heard the term swear like a sailor, The main character is a sailor. There is mention of spice, but none described. So I think that could lower the age range of this book a little bit. I would say not really young audiences. I would say it's young adult or adult. Main character is older. As far as appropriateness, if you don't mind language and knowing that adult relations happen, they just happen off screen. I do plan on making a spoilery video for this book. I really enjoyed it and a lot of the things that Amina went through on her adventure. So I'd like to talk more about those and not have to worry about spoilers. Thank you to my patrons, and if you would like to support me on Patreon, the link will be in the description. I hope this review was helpful, and happy reading. Bye.